Right, now let's pick up on what the president said at the end of the ANC's Lekgotla. Cyril Ramaphosa says the governing party is calling for a state of national disaster over the energy crisis. Let's speak now to energy expert and research fellow at the University of Cape Town's Global Risk Governance Program, Hilton Trollip. Mr. Trollip, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Obviously, just firstly, in terms of this call for it to be declared a national state of disaster, obviously this means that funds will then be relocated to dealing with this issue. Are you in agreement?
Good afternoon, Ms. Seiko. I agree that there is currently a disaster in South Africa. That is the prospect, which is almost certain, of at least stage 2 to 3 load shedding for the next 2 to 3 years, at least, unless some very important things are done. We will then have it even after 2 to 3 years. So I agree there is a disaster. However, I've dealt with and analyzed the legal framework and the legislation around energy and electricity for more than 20 years. And there's an energy action plan with 5 objectives set by government. All of those objectives are achievable within the existing legislative framework. So unless the government specifies additional objectives or can explain to us why it cannot achieve those objectives with the existing legal framework, I think that I'm very suspicious that the state of disaster will be used by those that have shown, and this is a matter of a record, in the courts recently, that they are trying to circumvent our legal system, to push through irrational energy projects which speak to special interests. I'm really worried about that. So you mentioned extra finance. I don't think a state of disaster is required to source finance. I think largely there is enough finance to do amongst the most important things. That Eskom had about a 3-hour press and national briefing, not this Sunday, but the one before. Yeah. And if you listen to that, I listened to the whole thing, the Eskom executive explained painstakingly how for 3 years they've been saying what needs to be done, what government needs to do, and how government has failed to do that. So what I worry about is that there's an election coming up. Government is deeply embarrassed at its failure in the electricity space. And now we're going to see a whole lot of desperate moves to try and, through smoke and mirrors, I don't know what, to cover up a situation where we can't get overload shedding in the next 2 years. It's not possible unless we all stop using electricity. But we can't do that because our basic needs rely on that and our economy relies on that. So I'm deeply skeptical, and I would like to hear, I was listening to the ANC Secretary General there saying that stuff that came out of the National Conference is now finding its way into the Cabinet Lekgotla. I don't think the ANC National Conference looked like the kind of place where any reasonable debate took place about energy. So if we're going to take what comes out of that conference and then use it as an excuse without reasons given for each of those objectives, which government has put in our energy action plan of the National Energy Committee, if it can't explain why it can't do those things with existing legislation, then it should not be trying to override legislation with a state of disaster.
And Mr. Trollip, from what you've just said, in terms of that press briefing by the Eskom executive and the Eskom board, outlining the advice that it's given to government and government not implementing some of the things that they advised. And then you look at people in government, including the president, saying that they've spoken to Eskom to remove that 18.65 tariff increase by NERSA, knowing that it's not that simple. You'd have to go to court to deal with this. And now we're hearing from different ministers saying that we'll get rid of load shedding completely. completely within 12 to 24 months. And now the Secretary General and his first deputy saying at the end of this year that's their aim. What do you think about all of this? Is this a populist government or a populist party trying to just make us believe them when we already, most of South Africans already don't? Or are we dealing with people who actually don't know how to deal with this crisis at all?
Maseko, you've kind of taken the words out of my mouth, but I will say them for myself. We have heard for years now that load shedding, this is the last of load shedding, there'll never be load shedding again. This is about 3-4 years ago, then it'll be over in 2 years, then it'll be over in 6 months, etc. The CSIR, I was just again looking at a detailed report, in fact 3 detailed reports, but 2 especially by the CSIR that they published in 2019 and 2020. This is now 3 and 4 years ago, explaining exactly what would happen if certain steps weren't taken by the government didn't take them. And that's what's happening. So yes, one, on the tariff issue, of course, we have to make absolutely sure poor households especially aren't exposed to another tariff increase. But that doesn't mean we must remove the tariff increase from all the middle income and rich households who actually use most of the electricity. So, it's populism at every level. It's trying to get the votes from everybody, but somebody's going to have to pay. That electricity is not going to be generated for free. So, yep, that's cheap politicking before an election. And it's the populism is in promises from cabinet ministers who have been in that cabinet for the past 10 years, some of them only 4 years, but they've been in the top 6 of the ANC. They've held the most senior positions in the ANC. They've been there for years and years and years, and they make the same promises. So on what basis? If they make the promise, I'd like to say, how? Just tell us how. There is the Energy Action Plan. Now we need to know from government how to implement that plan. Eskom knows what it has to do. Government kind of half knows what it has to do, but it won't do it because of the action of either people that have irrational, unscientific beliefs about what different generation technologies can do. And I'm not going to name them because these people take a position, but they don't explain why. They just they take it and then they just spin. And that's what's got us here.
And that's
Ministers
what makes
that actually don't show any understanding for the problem or the solution.
And that's what makes South Africans very
unfortunately,
despondent.
a president too at this stage.
Yeah, and that's what makes South Africans very despondent. I mean, if you look at the Stats SA figures of employment for the last time that they actually spoke to us, for the last quarter of 2022, it said that it improved. Even though it was a slight improvement, it improved, and it was because of people who own firms, etc. And if those people don't have electricity, I wonder what's going to happen to our unemployment figures this time around, right? But I don't know if you heard the first Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Nomvula Mokogane, speaking to my colleague Siphamandla Goke just a few moments ago. And I want to quote her. She said to Siphamandla, "We are not in panic mode. We are concerned like every other South African, but we are not in panic mode." We've heard about the concern, right? And I think many South Africans are despondent about that. Should they not be in panic mode right now?
Well, they're probably in panic mode about the election. And I only hear them taking this seriously because there's an election coming up. We didn't hear any of this stuff 2 or 3 years ago when the election was still years off. Just looking at the way they drive around in their big convoys and the way they live, we were promised lifestyle audits. We know the kind of corruption and money that flows in that organization. There have been countless now reports, the Zondo Commission, the Eskom inquiry. We were reminded in the newspapers recently of where a lot of this started in 2007 when the Medupi contracts were given to Hitachi Africa, and the ANC institutionalized the award of contracts in the words of the USA Securities and Exchange Commission, the award of contracts with essentially a foreign paying a political party in a foreign country to influence government to award contracts. So I think that the panic is that maybe the likes of Nomvula see that their time could be up soon. I haven't, the real state of disaster is poverty and unemployment, not electricity. So where's the and also crime and violence. And that I heard a bit of that interview. They say to the deputy SG, they say, and crime and violence. She says, we must all fight against crime and violence. Have you tried to go and report something at a police station? It's not. Apparently, it's not the South African police services anymore that must fight violent crime. Well, we must all do it. Yeah. I'm getting increasingly angry at this lot.